Good year.
So you're gonna start there. Oh, you got some tongs too.
Ready.
Anytime you're ready.
Anytime.
Okay, welcome to Tea and Tales, and our topic today is logging, the old days. And they're not so old because this young fella here is going to try to fill in as best he can. But before we start, I'd just like to draw your attention to some of the equipment on the side. This was donated by an ex-local resident, Joanne Nelly, who came here, I think, in the 40s after his stint in the Air Force, and he opened up Pemberton's first chainsaw business, and this was the mall dealership. And if you look at the pieces of equipment there, they look somewhat intimidating, and they were, but when you think that these were half the size of the other power saws that they were packed around the bush, this again was a real leap forward. And it wasn't until the mid-50s that they really took the weight reduction seriously, and this model, this yellow saw here, which was a McCulloch, was the saw that revolutionized the industry, and by what they call the direct drive lightweight saws. And one of the things that was interesting about these older saws is that they had to be held in one position before they could run, because if you turn them sideways, the carburetors quit working and they stalled out. So they developed a pumping system for these saws, and you could use them in any position until they got. And that's what we have today. Anyway, Joanne Nelly donated all of this stuff. These are some of the first saws that were power saws that were brought into Pemberton. And unbeknownst to most people, Mall also had electric power tools, and those are some of the ones that kept.
What's this thing?
That's a pair of tongs that was attached to a donkey, would hook onto a log and then drag it, lift it into place.
And the wrench?
The wrench was for the big saw blade on a nut, tightening the main nut.
Cool.
And those tongs in the background that's for hauling ice out of the lake to cool their drinks in the summer.
Those are L hooks.
The L hooks?
L hooks.
Okay. But anyway, Bob Gilmore is our guest today, and he spent a lot of time in the valley here. I think he was born here. No, he wasn't born until what? Richmond. Moved here as a young lad and spent a lot of time in the bush. And when I went up to see him and discuss the possibility of getting him to talk to you, we spent about an hour in the mill shed just going over bits and pieces of Pemberton history. So he's got a whole lot of things to tell you, and so he's going to start, and then I will ask him some questions if he misses a few things. So Bob, tell us about the early days of logging in Pemberton and how you got into it and what your views are.
Well, I showed up here in 1956. I was 18 years old. And I was supposed to be making a living in the farm. That didn't materialize, so I ended up going to a mill, and the mill that I was working at went into high-heat logging for the logs for the mills. That was the first time I seen anything to do with logging. And that would be 1957. And that was, what mentioned name?
Amazing, sure.
That was Harvey McNally and Bill Brothers. They were in partnership then. And Harvey got killed, so that was the first time they ever brought into anything like that. That was the first high lead I seen. Then from there, I went to work into another mill, and then there was a fellow by the name of Monty Montgomery. And he told me that he had a contract falling for Empire Mills. And Empire Mills was, they were bought out by Weldwood in Squamish a year or so after. But Empire Mills, they were working at Tisdale here, and he told me if I bought a power saw, I could go falling with him. and I never fell a tree in my life. I didn't know what a power saw looked like. So I borrowed $350 off Dad, and that's how much power saw cost those days, $350. And we could make, they paid us $2.50 a day for them. And by the time you got them paid for, they were, or they did smash it before. Well. But anyways, I went to work with Monty, and Monty put me on bucking with him, and I kind of worked there for a couple of days. He decided, well, I should go start falling. Well, I'm glad I was young and I could run. It was all hell breaking loose around there. But we eventually, then it just continued on. And we were making telephone poles, and that was all in contract. Telephone poles. There was, I was working with Lex Ross, Bud Fraser, Bill Byers, just a whole bunch of us. And that was the first thing they did here more so than logging, was make poles. And telephone poles were, they didn't have anything that was mechanical in those days, were peeling. And so we peeled them by hand, fell them, limbed them, and we got paid by the foot. It was all contract work. And we could make we'd make anywhere up to $40 a day. In those days, that was big money. And we were getting 5, 6 cents a foot. So I don't know how much work we were doing. We were going about, we would make, let's see, we'd make 10, 50-foot poles a day. And,
how many people would be doing that?
You're doing falling it. That's made the pole, 10, 50-foot poles.
By yourself?
One person?
Yeah, 500 feet. 500 feet. And we would, I was working with Lexi then when we were doing that. And then when we peeled, sometimes you just straight peeled, and you got a different price for that. We were up to 700 feet a day. And we got 20 years old and money hungry. And so we fly at it. Away we go. But then we started and I started working for other different companies. I worked for Cascade Fur, and I worked for, I had all these names in my mind before I come here, but I got over the door. But Cascade Fur and Empire Mills, Wellwood, there were just so many different people that we worked for. And I did work on under wooden trees. Usually what they did in about 1960, the steel spars started coming in and taking the place of wooden trees. But there were still 10-10 marches around. There were the yard machines, and they had great trees. And when I worked with mostly natives when we were rigging the rigging, and they were really good men in the rigging. And when logging first started here, it was just about all natives. There was hardly no whites. The whites might be running machinery, but mostly natives. I can name, dozens of them that worked with the Phillips, the Gabriel, Williamses, and the Pascals. The Pascals were all fallen. It just goes on and on. And after, say, about 66, they started disappearing. But I started working for a company, and I stayed with that company for 6 years making poles. That's all we did, make telephone poles. Then in 1970, we bought our boss out by a guy named Larry Hamula and myself. And then we started contracting, taking poles out for CFP, Canadian Forest Products, down the other end of the Lower Lake. And then we started logging. We started logging for CFP, and we were taking the timber license, a lot of the timber licenses. We worked through about 1980, taking all the different timber licenses. And then about 1980, we bought a mill ourselves, and a little mill. And 8 years. We had a small quota to cut ourselves. And we did that till 1987. And then Larry once wanted to move to Denman Island, so we sold everything. That was it. We just sold it all. Oh, I must mention on machinery in those days, when we bought it in between 70 and 80, we were paying 18% interest. That's what we were paying on it. That's what the interest was on that machinery. So we kept just working, paying the interest. And then Larry moved over to Denman Island, we sold everything. And then I went to work for CRB. And this was getting into the 90s now. I went to work for CRB and working in the landings and bucking logs. And then I worked, actually I was working on a grapple yarder for a while. Well, now I'd like everybody, would you like to ask me some questions? So I can.
What about the mill that,
Lion bar.
at the industrial park? I gather that was a mill at one time. The industrial park?
The Evans Mill.
Oh, in 72, Evans moved. Yeah. What about it?
How did it come about and what did it do?
Well, I think what happened, the government gave out a quota, and they got the quota, but with that quota you had to set up a mill in Pemberton. And that was in about 1970. And they ran that mill, all they made that mill was just a stud mill. And so when the price of studs went down, there they were. They couldn't go into other different lumber. So they lasted 2 years. And they took the quota and they went back to low. They still had the quota. We could never understand how they did that. Because they still had the quota, they had the timber, but they weren't in Pemberton anymore. They moved to Lilloway. So we were, quite upset about that. They moved out. It seemed as if they built the mill here just to get the quota, and once they got the quota, then they were gone. That was that.
That was the end of that mill.
That was the end of that mill.
It employed about 400 men.
Oh.
It was a very large operation.
With the contractors and all the logging contractors and all the people who worked in the mill. There's still people in the valley that came here because of that mill. Managed to find something else to do.
When you say that they got the quota, do you mean like the lease or
Timber.
the timber lease?
Quotas. In 1952 or 3, they started. Everything went to a quota system. And if you'd had a small timber sale in that period of time, you got a little quota. Everybody had there were so many little quotas in Pemberton at that time. And then the bigger outfits started buying them up, buying all the quotas up. And that's why there's just a few small operators left.
So today you'd call that a timber license?
I'm sorry?
Today you'd call that a timber license?
No, it's still quota, but
Yeah.
a timber license is different than there's a tree harvesting license, and there's a timber license, and there's a quota. So, well, maybe that's what they call it. I don't think so.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that you weren't too mechanized when you first started logging. What kind of machinery did you have to work with? Like, how did you get your poles out of the bush and then?
We had
Yeah, that's what I was going.
450 John Deere.
Okay.
We had a 450 John Deere. We could just go anywhere in these mountains with that 450 John Deere. We could winch it any place.
Oh, okay.
We winched up the hill. The winch and the tracks, everything seemed to work together. You could hang it straight up.
It was steel tires?
I'm sorry?
Steel tires on it?
Tracks.
No tracks.
Whatever.
Small bulldozer.
Yeah.
I'm a farmer.
No.
Oh, I see. Oh, I get you.
We did get rubber later with the skidders and that.
Yeah.
Now, when you got the poles all skinned and whatever you did, you loaded them on the train, or how did you get them out of
Yeah,
there?
we loaded them up, we put them on the truck, we hauled them down here, and they all went to Osier Cedar in Bellingham.
Oh,
So they had to be peeled. They had to be a finished product to go across the line.
Yeah.
And that was all during the 60s. And then in 1970, Pemberton Pole,
Oh, yeah.
Walter.
yeah, they brought in a mechanical peeler. That was just about time. My back was getting tired.
What'd you use, a big draw knife?
Axe.
An axe?
Oh, is that right?
Is that right?
Axe. We got so good we could just, you'd miss your feet by about that much.
My,
Whoosh,
my
and
son-
bark would be flying off.
My son worked in Madoc near Marmot, and they have a big peeling there,
Yeah,
and he did it by hand.
he did.
Everything by hand. They hired all the young kids, 18, 19, and if they wanted the job, that's what they did. My son got the job working there.
Peeling telephone
Peeling,
poles.
yep.
There's a lot of them nowadays, they'll use a draw knife.
Right out in the sun.
You know, right. That's why we used to like peeling them in the bush. We didn't have to be in the sun.
They work long hours, start 5 in the morning.